Next to South America, to Ica in Peru, where experts are studying some grisly relics from the past. The remains of Peruvian Indians who died over 1,000 years ago. These and hundreds of others come from the desert near the town of Ica. Grave robbers, or contractors' bulldozers, reveal clues to ancient burial grounds in the silvery sand. A team of local archaeologists follows up every report that burial grounds have been found. They've perfected a method of probing for mummy bundles which lie in shallow graves. Once located, it's just a matter of spade work before the find's disclosed, but the digging's done carefully to avoid damaging the more fragile relics. There's something there. A small, single mummy bundle, traditionally upright in the ground and surrounded by a number of pots and vases. A routine discovery for the team, who are nevertheless probably the first people to set eyes on the mummy for anything up to 2,500 years. It's in a very sound state. Still well preserved because the desert here is one of the driest in the world. Closer inspections revealed the mummy's probably only about 900 years old, and by the team's standards, that's nothing out of the ordinary. Its size indicates it's the remains of a small child, and the team decide to open it up on the spot, rather than wait until they take it back to the laboratory. Someone with a strong stomach finds the job easier. Thick layers of cotton wadding beneath wraps of cloth help keep the remains intact. By now, the team are sure that they found the bundle of a small baby, and as the layers come off, the form beneath proves them right. The hair on the baby's head unharmed despite the passage of centuries. Historically, it's not a significant find, at least not on the surface. But the mummy research at nearby Ica goes much deeper than plain archaeology. For the last 4 years, the team's been passing on finds like this to a special unit who are using up-to-date methods of pathology to build up a picture of diseases in ancient times and their bearing on medicine today. The work's led by an American, Dr. Marvin Allison of Richmond, Virginia, who's written several papers on his experiments here. Though his research hasn't yet turned up any clues to the origins of the ancient Peruvian tribes, Dr. Allison's still trying. If he can establish the individual relationships of a large number of mummies, he's well on the way. So his first job is always to date the remains and record each one's blood and chemical groups. For the preliminary tests, samples have to be prepared. Small scrapings of bone, skin, muscle, and sometimes hair are collected from the remains and then ground to form a suitable powder for analysis. In addition to undergoing routine chemical tests, the powder will be dated by the carbon-14 method. When ages and causes of death have been established, the remains are sometimes reconstructed for exhibition in the museum. Even centuries-old bones have a tale to tell. These are the femur and tibia of the baby found in the desert. Cleaned up, they'll be x-rayed for Harris lines, the distinctive ridges of calcium which build up on bones when childhood illnesses halt their growth. In this case, Dr. Allison's other autopsy tests have pointed to starvation and a liver complaint as the causes of death. A study of these bones should complete the picture. Harris lines are present. 2 thin bone scars at the top of the femur indicate 7 days stoppage in growth, and Dr. Allison reckons that it happened shortly before death. Another technique, rehydration. After a week in a special solution, dry tissue thousands of years old returns to its normal size and consistency. Rehydration was used on this hand to find traces of Carrion's disease, an often fatal illness which plagued the tribes in low mountain areas. Dr. Allison found the characteristic white rash on this hand, proving its owner had been afflicted. Carrion's disease is one of Dr. Allison's specialities, and amazingly, it's specimens from the 1,000-year-old remains of Ica that help him with his studies into it even today. He takes tiny sections of skin and stains them with medical dyes so that the lesions caused by the disease will show up under the microscope. This is the view magnified 20 times. Magnified 1,000 times. The details of the ancient disease are still visible. This 32-year-old woman had tuberculosis of the spine and was buried with her cane. The team knows she contracted the disease after she was 16 because no Harris lines were present. As a result of the tuberculosis, 2 vertebrae collapsed and fused, giving the unfortunate woman a spine bent at almost 90 degrees. It's one of Dr. Allison's fascinating case histories, but even more interesting is this: the mummy of an 8-year-old child who died about 1,300 years ago. He's the first proven case of tuberculosis in the Americas. Having contracted it before the coming of any white man, including the Vikings, he disproves the theory that tuberculosis was imported by the Spanish conquistadors. The boy's leg muscles had withered away. The legs were almost certainly paralyzed, and he was eventually buried in this unusual squatting position. The spine was twisted to the left, partly because of his tuberculosis and partly because of a large abscess near the muscles of his lower back. An X-ray confirmed Dr. Allison's visual examination. The curvature of the spine's apparent and the spot where the abscess was can just be made out. This is the head of a boy found with 21 others, all victims of a mass human sacrifice. His ear is pierced for a ring, and the cord with which he was strangled is still around his neck. The sacrifices were discovered in a specially built gallery. This young man came from the same spot. He'd been cut in half at the waist, and only 1 lung and a piece of his liver remained inside. The theory is that the man's organs were taken by his people for a macabre fortune-telling ceremony. Barbaric though the Indians may seem, in some ways they were an advanced civilization. Their medical knowledge 1,000 years ago was way ahead of that in Europe. They knew of 2,000 herbs which had medicinal value and used them to combat disease. But most astonishing was their surgery. They holed or trephined skulls to relieve pressure on the brain. Though their tools were primitive, their success rate almost equals ours today. The ancient Indians left plenty of evidence to show what kind of people they were, what their lives were like, and what they believed. Some were weavers. These shirts are over 1,000 years old. They're beautifully woven and brilliantly dyed. They believed strongly in a life after death. burying all manner of items with their loved ones. This toy dancing man was retrieved from a child's shallow grave. There were also flutes, whistles, dolls, combs, a host of earthly possessions. From infancy, the Nazca people deformed their skulls. It was the way they set themselves apart from lesser tribes. Incidentally, the skulls are almost 5,000 years old. They were warriors, fierce and merciless, not scared of death. Indeed, their sacrifices were usually performed to send on a willing relative to join an already dead member of the family. But they dispatched their enemies too. When they'd killed in battle, they wore their victim's head as a trophy on their belt. These skulls date back 2,000 years. Another Inca case study. This 8-year-old girl from 800 AD was found buried with her pet parrot. A mummified tribesman. Beard and moustache still preserved. At Ica, the studies span 5,000 years, from the earliest mummies to bundles a mere 5 centuries old. Mummification was practiced here, as in Egypt of course, to preserve the body from decay and perpetuate the personality of the deceased. They've done just that. For in Ica Museum, the ancient Peruvians most certainly live on.